The Communist Manifesto. In 1847, a group of radical workers called the Communist League met in London. They commissioned Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, who had recently become members, to write a manifesto on their behalf, soon known as the Communist Manifesto. When they wrote the piece, socialism and communism were not clearly defined concepts. Everyone had their own eclectic idea of what the terms meant, all trying to address the problems that had fully bloomed by the capitalist society, problems we're still dealing with today. Marx was the principal author, with Engels editing and assisting. What they set out to do in the Communist Manifesto was to properly define what that something beyond the present state of means meant. The Communist Manifesto was originally published in London in 1848. Of all the documents of modern socialism, it is the most widely read and the most influential. It is the systematic statement of the philosophy that has come to be known as Marxism. Marx was born in 1818 and he passed away in 1883. He is a German philosopher, economist, and sociologist, as well as a political revolutionary. He met Engels 1820 to 1895 when he moved to Paris after 1843, and they worked together on several essays. Marx and Engels are best known for their revolutionary writings about communism. The Communist Manifesto can be understood as one attempt to influence history by spreading information about the communist movement. The Communist Manifesto reflects an attempt to explain the goals of communism as well as the theory underlying this movement. It argues that class struggles or the exploitation of one class by another are the motivating forces behind all historical developments. Class relationships are defined by an era's means of production. However, eventually the relationships cease to be compatible with the developing forces of production. At this point, a revolution occurs and a new class emerges as the ruling one. This process represents the march of history as driven by larger economic forces. Modern industrial society, in specific, is characterized by class conflict between the bourgeoisie and proletariat. However, the productive forces of capitalism are quickly ceasing to be compatible with this exploitative relationship. Thus, the proletariat will lead a revolution. However, this revolution will be of a different character than all previous ones. Previous revolutions simply reallocated property in favor of the new ruling class. However, by the nature of their class, the members of the proletariat have no way of appropriating property. Therefore, when they obtain control, they will have to destroy all ownership of private property and classes themselves will disappear. The manifesto argues that this development is inevitable and that capitalism is inherently unstable. The communists intend to promote this revolution and will promote the parties and associations that are moving history towards its natural conclusion. They argue that the elimination of social classes cannot come about through reforms or changes in government. Rather, a revolution will be required. The Communist Manifesto is divided into a preamble and 4 sections, and the last of these a short conclusion. The introduction begins, "A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise the spectre," pointing out that parties everywhere, including those in government and those in the opposition, have flung the branching reproach of communism at each other. The authors interfere from this that the powers that be acknowledge communism to be a power in itself. Subsequently, the introduction exhorts communists to openly publish their views and aims to meet with necessary tale of spectre of communism with the manifesto of the party itself. The first section of the manifesto, called The Bourgeoisie and the Proletarians, elucidates the material concept of history, that the history of all the hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle. Society have always taken the form of an oppressed majority, exploited under the yoke of an oppressive minority. In capitalism, the industrial working class or the proletariat engage in class struggle against the owners of the means of production, the bourgeoisie. As before, the struggle will end in a revolution that restructures society or the common ruin of the contending classes, the bourgeoisie, through the constant revolutionizing of production and uninterrupted disturbances of all social conditions, have emerged as a supreme class in society, displacing all the old powers of feudalism. The bourgeoisie constantly exploit the proletariat for its labor power, creating profit for themselves and accumulating capital. However, in doing so, the bourgeoisie serve as its own grave diggers. The proletariat inevitably will become conscious of their own potential and rise to power through revolution, overthrowing the bourgeoisie. The second section is called The Proletarian and Communists, which starts by stating the relationship of conscious communist to the rest of the working class. The Communist Party will not oppose other working class parties, but unlike them, we will express the general will and defend the common interests of the world's proletariat as a whole, independent of all nationalities. The section goes on to defend communism from various objections, including claims that it advocates communal prostitution, or disinterests people from working. The section ends by outlining a set of short-term demands, among them a progressive income tax, abolition of inheritances and private property, abolition of child labor, free public education, nationalization of the means of transport and communication, centralization of credit via a national bank, expansion of publicly owned land, etc., the implementation of which would result in a precursor or a stateless and classless society. The third section, Socialist and Communist Literature, distinguishes communism from other socialist doctrines prevalent at the time, these being broadly categorized as reactionary socialism, conservative or bourgeoisie socialism, and critical utopian socialism and communism. While the degree of reproach towards rival perspective varies, all are dismissed for advocating reformism and failing to recognize the preeminent revolution role of the working class. The concluding section, which is the position of the communists in relation to the various opposition party. This is a concluding section of the manifesto, briefly discusses the communist position on struggles in specific countries in the mid-19th century, such as France, Switzerland, Poland, and Germany. This last being on the eve of bourgeoisie revolution, and predicts that a world revolution will soon follow. It ends by declaring an alliance with the democratic socialist, boldly supporting the communist revolutions and calling for united international proletarian action. The end. Thank you.